Let's go ahead and start.
Oh, we're missing James.
Ready?
There's no cue, so we're good.
All right, I think we can put up the slides. And we'll begin. Hello, everyone. I'm Daniel Kirshner. I'm in the Office of General Counsel, and I also serve as Senior Advisor on Internet Policy. Up here with me are Henny Schultz-Rinne, our CTO, Deborah Broderson from the Consumer Governmental Affairs Bureau, James Miller and Walter Johnston from the Office of Engineering and Technology, and Elliot Manor from the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau. So we're gathered here today to announce a plan to add mobile broadband performance measurements to our Measuring Broadband America program. Up here on the slide is sort of a kind of mission statement that working in open collaboration to build a transparent measurement collection and reporting methodology and to publish a freely available data set of U.S. consumer broadband performance. And that's sort of an umbrella statement for the whole Measuring Broadband America program, which includes testing of fixed residential broadband, and now today we're announcing the addition of mobile broadband. So a little over 2 years ago, we set out to test residential broadband performance. And James will be talking a little bit more about how that program operates in a moment. But I wanted to say a little bit about how important we think it has been in informing the marketplace and encouraging improvements in service. Our initial Measuring Broadband America report, which was released in August 2011, presented the first broad-scale study of actual home broadband performance throughout the United States. The Measuring Broadband America program developed out of a recommendation by the National Broadband Plan to improve the availability of information for consumers about their broadband service. It is part of a comprehensive series of initiatives that draw upon cooperation between the Commission, industry, and other stakeholders to promote transparency and ensure that consumers get the information they need to make informed marketplace decisions and to effectively manage communications, subscriptions, and services. Other examples include the Bill Shock Initiative, which notifies mobile subscribers before they incur overage charges, and the Protect Initiative, which informs consumers about how to secure their smartphones and deters theft by preventing smartphones from being reactivated. At the time we began work on our first Measuring Broadband America report, we did not know what to expect. There was a widespread assumption that Internet service providers were not delivering the speeds they advertised. Our first report showed that most ISPs were doing a good job of delivering on advertised speeds, but there were some outliers. The results of the test reported in August 2011 comparing advertised to actual broadband speeds informed the marketplace, shown up in the news, on the websites of consumer groups, and in television commercials, radio ads, and press releases from ISPs themselves. When we issued a one-year update this past July, we saw that the gap between advertised and actual speeds narrowed. Some ISPs that had the largest gap in the first report improved remarkably. One ISP, which in the first report had delivered only about 50% of advertised speed during the most demanding peak usage periods, in 2012 delivered better than advertised speeds across each of its speed tiers during peak periods. Almost across the board, the July 2012 report showed that ISPs were doing a better job of delivering what they promised to their customers than they did 1 year earlier. We also saw significant improvements in overall speeds and various other important metrics. Now, the National Broadband Plan recommended that the FCC study mobile broadband performance in addition to residential broadband performance. Since we began the Measuring Broadband America program 2 years ago, we have been thinking about how to include mobile broadband performance measurement. As mobile broadband has become part of our everyday communications infrastructure, it remains difficult for consumers to get detailed information about their mobile broadband performance. The effort we begin today hopefully will change that. This is really the beginning of a process where we really need your input and want your thoughts on how best to proceed. In announcing our plan to include mobile measurements in the Measuring Broadband America program, we are also committing to abide by the central tenets of that program, which include working in open collaboration with interested stakeholders, building a transparent measurement collection and reporting methodology, and publishing comprehensive data and a detailed report so that the U.S. public, for the first time, will have access to detailed information about networks that become an integral part of all of our daily lives. So with that, I hand things over to Deborah.
Thank you. So it's no secret that consumers are relying on smartphones, on cell phones to go online more than ever before. A 2012 study by the Pew Internet program found that 55% of cell owners use the internet or email on their phones. And the slide here shows that for many, particularly low-income consumers, mobile internet is the primary or even the sole means of regular internet access. So 43% of consumers with incomes of less than $30,000 a year use cell mostly internet users. They may have some other limited access, but mostly use their cells to internet. Thank you. So I think most of you probably remember the National Broadband Plan. I brought a copy in case anyone was nostalgic. It was released in March of 2012.
2010.
2010, I'm sorry. We're in 2012. It established goals for the FCC to evaluate broadband performance capabilities for mobile and for fixed. Recommended the establishment of a partnership with industry and consumer groups to provide input on standards and methodology, and suggested the FCC should publish reports and make that data publicly available online. And James is going to talk a little bit more about what we did as a result of those recommendations.
Thank you, Deborah. Coming out of the National Broadband Plan's recommendation, we began the Measuring Broadband America program with an initial focus on wireline broadband performance, as my colleagues have mentioned. We initiated the process in 2010, working with SAMNOS, which has conducted similar efforts in other countries, and from the very beginning, brought the program from a very collaborative approach with the cooperation of 13 ISPs that provide service to some 85% of U.S. broadband consumers. We had enjoyed the participation and contributions of numerous academics from places such as MIT and Georgia Tech and others. We also solicited and received a variety of input from consumer groups as well as manufacturers, and developed a very collaborative process coming out of that effort. Oh, the clicker, sorry. We published our first report last year in August. That report was based on data that was gathered in March of 2011. Happily, we released our second report in July. That report was based on data that was gathered in April of this year, and we're in currently another measurement cycle. The data that we are collecting this month in September, we hope to release a report sometime soon based on that data. So we're entering the third cycle of our data release and reporting. The methodology and metrics that we've developed through this program have been based on the input from industry and other stakeholders, including academics and public interest groups. And we'd like to talk a little bit more about that. This is a non-proprietary approach. As we've talked about, these technologies are open and transparent. They're based on an open source approach, so the licensing for our testing is made available to all. And all of our data is made public, and that's very exciting. Also, we are initiating on a variety of fronts standards efforts to bring that technology to a broader deployment. The scope of our data collection network that's deployed is nationwide and covers across the nation. Talking a little bit more about our collaborative model. As we mentioned, the measurement program has been guided from input from both industry and academia and consumer groups and others, and we see this as a very unique and highly successful model, and are reviewing how to apply that in other contexts. Regular stakeholder meetings are held. We discuss direction and issues and the objectives of the program. These meetings are always open to all interested parties, and while we do have conflicts on occasion, we seek to resolve those conflicts collaboratively in the context of that process, but we ultimately retain the final decision-making authority, and that serves as another feature. The participative model has been very successful over these 2 years, and we're very pleased in the progress of that, and we'll talk a little bit more about how that will be applied later. Moving to our next slide. we'd like to talk about the nature of the openness and the transparency of the program. We founded this program on principles of openness and transparency. From the very first meeting that we held in 2010, we discussed these principles, and as we've talked about with this collaborative stakeholder element to the program is also fundamentally structured on non-proprietary testing methodologies. These methodologies are published and duplicable by other parties, and the data, of course, that we collect, as we mentioned, is released publicly. In our next slide, you'll see a depiction of kind of our collection platform, the architecture. You'll note at the top right, there is an indicator of a controller. At the very center of the testing platform, we have the ability to change tests, to schedule them scientifically, to change the amount of data, for example, that might be executed or in a particular test. The controller then pushes down to a variety of software testing clients, the schedules for those tests, as well as when and where those tests would be executed. And then the software testing client initiates those tests against a series of measurement servers. After the results of the test are measured by the client, those results are then pushed up to an archive that's also depicted in this graph. And so now, having talked about the approach that we've taken over the last 2 years and some of our architecture, I turn the floor over to my colleague, Walter Johnston, to talk about how that applies to mobile. And the clicker.
Okay.
It's wireless, by the way.
Okay, I'm going to be talking about a mobile extension to our current program. The purpose of today's meeting is fairly simple. We want to discuss our current plans. We want to describe the framework for the program. And to the extent we can, we will answer questions. But I want to emphasize that we've chosen a collaborative model. That means we're engaging with stakeholders at a very, very early stage in the process. Dan mentioned this. I just want to emphasize this is the beginning of a program. It's not a fully fleshed out program, but we are excited about doing this, and we believe talking to other parties is within our capabilities to successfully complete. This is a cross-bureau effort. That's another thing I want to emphasize, again, something we're very proud of. We're working much more within the Commission in terms of leveraging with our resources to best effect. This is a collaboration between the Consumer Bureau, between the Wireless Bureau, and the Office of Engineering and Technology. We've also had ongoing discussions over an extended period of time with mobile providers regarding the potential for doing broadband mobile measurements. We have received support from major mobile providers, including AT&T, Sprint, T-Mobile, Verizon, and the trade organization CTIA. We are working to secure support of other mobile providers and industry groups. This is very important in a collaborative process. So we're seeking relevant stakeholders to work with us in an open, transparent, and collaborative fashion. We've developed an initial proposal to collect broadband performance data, one that leverages our current capabilities and positioning. We're looking to work in the context of our current program and to reuse an existing data collection platform and available software. In considering our plan, we looked at a number of alternative methodologies for measuring broadband performance. I'm not going to go through them. I'll just say that there's an incredible diversity of ways that you can characterize mobile broadband performance. Some of them go back decades, some of them are relatively new. We've considered all of them. What we're proposing is a volunteer-based smartphone app proposal using an open-source client software application running on volunteer smartphones, using a randomized testing schedule that builds on efforts already underway in other regulatory jurisdictions, one that to us is efficiently scalable, and one that we can supplement with fixed position monitoring. We've chosen this for a number of reasons. This approach leverages our existing program. We already have deployed software and infrastructure that allows us to have a data collection network. We have available to us through existing sources an Android open source client as a starting point for discussion in terms of how we might develop and deploy a smartphone client. We're going to extend a process that we're very familiar with at this point, a collaborative process developed in our Measuring Broadband America effort, one that gains input from industry and academia, consumer groups, on both the process we will employ and the metrics that we will use. We expect to have a broad discussion of various issues within this process, including consumer privacy protection, security, testing, and other issues. And we expect, as an extension of our program, to fully maintain the principles of openness and transparency that we've been credited for within our existing program. And that includes no proprietary measurements or metrics, using open source clients for the measurement process, and again, report and data become public information. In the collaborative process, we look to input from key stakeholders in various forms. We expect to work with industry groups such as the CTIA, as well as with the individual participation of key stakeholders and other interested parties. These have included in our current program manufacturers, academics, consumer groups, and individual providers, and in our future program, mobile providers. We hold these meetings on a regular basis. We typically meet within the wireline program with groups ranging from 20 to over 60 people. We meet in person and via teleconference, and we meet on average about once a month. We seek input and rough consensus when possible, but in the end, it's our program and we make the final decisions. James provided a very high-level overview of our current architecture. We're expecting to reuse that architecture, reuse the data collection software, reuse the controller and the data archive, and shift towards a program that employs smartphone apps to collect broadband performance data. We expect to work collaboratively with mobile providers and others, both planning the details of the measurement plan, the execution plan, and the interpretation of the results. We've done this in another venue over 2 years, and we know that this program both works and provides the highest value to the consumer and to the public. And associated with our report, we release the data we accumulate for research purposes for further inspection. Some of the metrics that we propose as for a starting discussion to acquire include such things as latency and packet loss, upload speed test, download speed test, as well as infrastructure data such as a cell tower ID. We're open to discussion on what metrics we should be accumulating and how we should get them. We have a very high-level schedule, and I'll emphasize this again. This is the start of a program. So these are goals, not worked out, per chart type schedules. We expect in the fourth quarter of 2012 to be working with a number of parties, providing testing of client software, academic testing of code and metrics. This is something, again, we did in the prior program. An examination of key issues with stakeholders, privacy, metrics, security, data formats, test schedules, the setting of scaling goals, volunteer enlistments, all the mundane issues that pertain to a complex program. We expect that we'll be releasing code and documentation associated with this effort. We expect to shift in the early part of 2013 to starting data collection efforts. Hopefully, by second quarter of 2013, we expect to shift to an analysis phase where we can start taking some of the data we've gotten and working again with relevant stakeholders, discuss analytical methods, and ultimately produce a report associated with the data collection effort. Our objectives are very simple. We want to provide consumers and policymakers with detailed and comparative data on mobile broadband services. I work on a number of committees within the Commission. I don't think it's a surprise to anyone how important mobile technology is becoming to this country, both in terms of the consumer and the economy of this country, and this data is very important. We want to work cooperatively with key stakeholders to plan the program. We want to reuse the open methodologies, open source software, and open discussions that have worked so well in our current program. We're announcing today the beginning, and I'll emphasize that again, the beginning, only the beginning of a mobile broadband measurement program. We have many questions remaining. We have many answers to be derived. We expect to work cooperatively to define the full details of the program. We have an excellent 2-year record in this regard. We expect to have a first M collaborative meeting on October the 10th, and we would invite interested parties to either contact us or contact a trade group or other organizing unit that you expect to be working with us on this. And with that, we'll shift to any questions the audience might have.
I got a question.
Would you use the microphone?
If you could move to the center aisle, we have a mic available.
Sure. So it's going to be on an Android client. What about Apple? Are you guys bringing them into the process?
They're in development right now. The Android client was first available, so it represents a good stalking horse in terms of discussions. We expect to make other clients available.
And we would certainly be open to contributions by others since the metrics are open. So if interested parties that want to contribute to other platforms beyond the current initial ones, please come talk to us. Very much appreciated.
And I'll add, as long as it meets the requirements we have for openness and transparency and other requirements we have associated with the program.
So these aren't really suggestions. These are kind of wide open questions. Two things that strike me as different in trying to measure mobile as opposed to fixed. Mm-hmm. One, on a very short time scale, kind of within sub-second, users that are trying to use applications like voice over IP may be very sensitive to fluctuations that we would expect to see maybe much more often in wireless than in wireline. Mm-hmm. And I'm not quite sure what metrics to suggest, but seems like that's something that might bear some thought. The second one, on a much longer time scale, as users are roaming around and their distance from the base station is changing, we'd expect to see a much greater fluctuation in the sustained throughput or the sustained rate that they see. And so in the last report you had on the wireline, you had a distribution function. And you'd expect if that was measured per user across different users, if it was measured for a user as they're roaming around, that they might look very different. And that's a natural part of the technology. But again, that may be something that could be interesting from the user's point of view. I'm kind of wondering if you thought about either of those.
So let me just try to address both of those questions. And as Walt mentioned, these are all very good inputs into the discussion process, but I'll just refer to the existing program for our first question. Indeed, we've tried for several metrics to come up with application-related metrics, not just simply do throughput that are averaged over a longer time period, but also metrics that are more indicative without trying to exactly model a specific application, including in our existing program, voice over IP application. We anticipate that we will continue to do that for exactly the reasons you mentioned. But it's also important, I think, to point out that we will never here, whatever the outcome of a discussion is, be able to do every possible analysis in that. And indeed, I think one of the strengths of the existing program has been that there have been many people outside that have then used the data to do analysis which go into much more depth to investigate that. For example, at the conference tomorrow at TPSC, there will be a paper investigating a variation of a question for the type of issue, variability issue that you just alluded to. So we see that clearly as one of the markers of mobile is how do we capture both spatial and temporal variability, which is going to be much larger than what we have there. And we look for input both in terms of making sure that we gather the right data, because without the data, nobody else can do that with it, and also the possible content for our report, recognizing, just as we did for the wireline report, that is a work in progress. If you compare the first and second wireline report, you can see that we've evolved and enhanced the analysis between those, and we anticipate that will happen as well. So that is not going to be a one-shot deal. It's a longer-term evolution.
Hi, I'm Roger Marks, and I'm chairman of the IEEE 802.16 Working Group on Broadband Wireless Access Standards. I wanted to see your perspectives on working with standards organizations in this mobile product space. We have a project that was just approved as a new activity, and we had our first meetings this last week, and we're doing a project on mobile broadband network performance measurement standards. So as a result of the meetings in the week, we've cast around with inquiries to relevant external organizations to get a perspective on our technical requirements as we begin the standardization process, and would like to try to get some input on that documentation. And I'm wondering if that's the kind of thing that your program might be willing to participate in.
So, as James hinted at, we've recently started to work with 3 standards organizations, including yours, the Broadband Forum, and the Internet Engineering Task Force, the IETF, on defining components of what is overall a fairly complex system. So, as you alluded to, we would like to have standardized metrics eventually, because that ensures very precise, repeatable definition beyond just the open source code that we will provide. We will try to define, in parallel to both the existing wireline and wireless efforts, the protocols that we need to gather the data and to archive it and to control the system in ways that are efficient and secure. And we will then also define the operational metrics that are necessary in some form, free form. So we invite we are hoping that our project will contribute to those standardization efforts simply by providing, if you like, a test case for that. And we certainly look forward to working with the IEEE, the IETF, and the Broadband Forum to define all of those in a collaborative fashion in that, and that we've set up various mechanisms for doing it. We're not certainly going to be the only driver for that. There are many other groups that are interested in that, but we certainly see that as one way to ensure the long-term sustainability of such a program. Among other reasons, that makes it much easier for third parties to develop tools that then can play part of that infrastructure, particularly as the infrastructure then evolves, as is being discussed for a fixed case, into more than just an FCC data gathering infrastructure, but evolves into something that carriers, users, and vendors might use for their own purposes, leveraging the work as well as the insights that are gathered as part of this pilot program. We will not, however, unfortunately, be able to wait for those standards efforts. I see that as a parallel effort.
Hi, my name is Amit Malhotra. I work for Metrico Wireless, and we actually provide data performance measurement to most of the operators here in the U.S. I'm particularly interested in what you talked about, your volunteer-based platform. So I'm assuming that means that you're getting volunteers out in the markets who will then download the client and then use that to upload performance measurement to your controller. So the question I have is, how will you then account for the significantly larger variability in the conditions, such as, stationary versus mobile, the much larger diversity of technologies for access, et cetera?
You want me to? Or Walt?
We recognize those problems, and we also recognize that there are other metrics available. So we're planning to accumulate data from a volunteer program, as you indicated. We expect to have a fairly significant number of volunteers based upon discussions we've had with some of the carriers, some of the wireless service providers. We expect to get information associated with the type of platform that the devices are running on. We have the ability to run randomized testing, so we're taking at least one bias out of the equation. This is one data set. It's one data set in a way that is commonly measured today. We expect to, one of the analytical challenges is to try to baseline this data set against other standardized measurement sets. So one of the things we're discussing with the wireless service providers is accumulating a data set based upon this measurement approach accumulating variables associated with the data set, such as the type of platform that the user is using, and then seeing how well this data set correlates with other data sets. We mentioned, for example, in our program, we expect to have fixed wireless locations as sort of beacon reference points that we want to correlate against. And there are other data sets that we're starting to begin to look at to gain access to that we could align our data set against. So when I said at the beginning we have a lot of questions and some answers, this is a question we know that exists. We expect to work with industry, we expect to work with the university community to see how useful this approach is.
Thanks. And just one other quick question, just to confirm my understanding, the development that you're talking about, is that actually being undertaken by the FCC? So the development of the clients, for example?
The client has been developed by our contractor, Sam Knows, and is being provided as will be provided as open source.
Thanks.
And as I mentioned earlier on, just to make sure there's no misunderstanding, we're very open to other client developments as well, just to get things started since it is a popular platform, and to provide a reference. We will use the client mentioned, but we're certainly very interested in talking to anybody who has, for any platform, Android, iPhone, Windows, you name it, BlackBerry, you name it, has a client available or is willing to work with us on a client.
Hi, Tim Brooks, ASCOM. We've done a lot of work measuring data performance, and as we get into 4G, we find that data performance is one thing, but end-user experience starts to become disconnected or not as tightly connected to data performance as it was with 2G and 3G. So I want to ask, are you considering how you would measure end-user experience, which is a function of data performance, the application that they're using, and tends to be more to do with end-to-end than just looking at the wireless data link?
So you allude to, again, another important question that we will have to nail down much more precisely than the initial thoughts that we have, that Walt and James have already expressed, is I can refer to the existing wireline program where we have tried to find a middle ground between measuring exactly one application and one service, which is going to be difficult to scale given the variety of websites, services, and so on, and which is probably inappropriate in a number of ways to do as this type of effort, yet find something which is perceived to be by our external contributors and other parties who advise us to be reasonably representative of the kind of user experience that you would get for those type of services. So for the existing program, we have video, voice, and web metrics using existing commercial services or approximations of the traffic. The details need to be worked out clearly for this program. One of the objectives certainly is also to have baselines that make it reasonably comparable across modalities so that we can compare, for example, web browsing experience on a mobile device versus a landline device. That's going to be another challenge. But certainly we see that as one of the issues of finding this reasonable middle ground so that we don't get lost in trying to evaluate web page performance for each vendor, which commercial companies are doing today, yet not just have raw throughput numbers which have no real relationship to user experience either.
Let me just say one other thing Henning mentioned earlier, which I think is important. We found in the prior program that as we gained experience in the data, we evolved the program, and Henning pointed this out, that I think we'll make a reasonable compromise working with all stakeholders, but we will also likely evolve the program as we gain knowledge.
Hello, I'm Paul Carter. I'm with Global Wireless Solutions. We're the largest independent provider of voice and packet data, wireless benchmarking data across the US. So we'd very much like to be involved in this. And I have tons of comments and suggestions. But one question I will ask right now is you talk about mobile broadband, but what about voice? Do you have any plans to test the voice network performance?
We do not have any plans. Not at the moment. Yeah.
Okay. And the other comment I'd make is that this wireline and wireless, as you probably know, are totally different ball games, and it's a very messy business that you're getting into. So we'd love to help you out.
Thank you.
That's great. We appreciate there are many different approaches, and they have different values, and so we're very excited to work with people about different approaches and think about how different approaches complement the approach that we're considering here.
And we certainly, particularly, we know that a number of efforts have been undertaken, and we certainly try to stand on the shoulders of giants, so to say, as opposed to on their feet. And so we will certainly look forward to hearing from people that have done that so that we don't make the same mistakes that others have already avoided. So that's particularly important to have you and colleagues and others who are in this field let us know so that while we won't avoid every possible trap, we'll at least try to avoid the ones we should have known about. So very much an open invitation for anybody who particularly has experience doing that to contribute their insight, suggestions to the process.
Got a question about what you said about randomized testing. So you have, pardon me?
Did you identify yourself?
Dave Fitzgerald with ASCOM, network testing. You talked about randomized testing. So the client is crowdsourced, and they're going to use their services they do normally, and that's a passive test. So then a randomized active test, can you describe how that might work?
So
basically, the client will be capable of self-initiating a test under certain criteria that we're going to establish with the service providers that both they're comfortable with and their consumers would be comfortable with. And that's to avoid some of the obvious problems. When we went through this with the wireline program, it was pointed out that self-initiated tests often have a bias built in, or assumed bias built in, because when things are working, people could care less about what their performance is, but often they're interested in service performance when things are not working as well. So we do have a capability to do self-initiated, randomized testing of certain metrics. We are also open to discussion on passive metrics that we can acquire from the smartphone as well. Subject to all the criteria, I want to emphasize there's a lot of criteria that the testing program has to meet. It has to meet our needs in terms of collecting data for the public. It has to meet the service provider's needs in terms of ensuring that their network is protected. And most importantly, it has to meet the consumer's needs in terms of privacy and security. So there's going to be a lot of discussion, but yes, we recognize that there's passive and active data. The active data we expect to get in a randomized, self-initiated testing fashion that's non-intrusive to the customer.
In particular, we want to build a sustainable program, so issues of usability and privacy, for example, for users are a very important design consideration for our program.
Yeah, I don't want to mention.
And again, if you could just identify yourself.
Kevin Kapp, I'm with Mobile Pulse. We have a lot of focus on local government that have an interest in mobile, police and fire that rely on this for mission critical applications. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that you might consider or want to look at is the dispatch managers have the ability to take the mobile networks down anytime they do a reverse 911. And they're sometimes loath to do this because everyone jumps on their mobile phone when they get a reverse 911, and they're still trying to get 911 notifications out, and yet everyone's getting on to look up data and figure out where they're going to go or what's going to happen. So partnering with local governments somehow in this process may be interesting because it's just a real good data point for you guys to know when a 911 reverse happens and how that impacts the network, because it's an emergency service kind of aspect. So consider that. Our product really helps local governments because it has a more proactive dashboard. And I'm just wondering if local governments would be able to take advantage of your solution at all, because I don't know too much about the Sam Knows solution, but my understanding is a data set, and I don't know how they would take advantage of that at the local government level.
So we would anticipate, First, thank you for the suggestion, and I'll make two comments to try to address those. First of all, even in the much simpler wireline case, we've always had to deal with exceptional cases where something just wasn't working right, and we had, as part of a collaborative, established mechanisms to deal with outlier data points. The full data remains available, but in terms of the analysis, there are ways of dealing with outliers so that they don't distort the consumer experience indicators that we publish. It's certainly helpful to the extent that we can get it, that if we know about external events that could influence the accuracy and trustworthiness of data, such as these type of special network impairments, to know about those, and to the extent that those can be made available, I think that would be extremely helpful, and we'd invite your participation to see how we can integrate that into the program. In terms of your second question, how local governments can make use of the data, the data itself, every measurement, will be available as it is for the wireline case as soon as the report is published or soon after the report is published. And so certainly local communities can extract data that is relevant to their community. We would imagine that simply because of the technical skills required to analyze the data, that working with, say, a local university, a consulting agency, or whatever seems most appropriate, would be quite helpful for communities to identify how good wireless broadband is in their community as well. So that's the point of making all the data, including device information, location information, cell site information, available to interested parties, because we have no way of anticipating all the good uses it could be put to, and certainly much more localized analysis is an extremely valuable outcome that we would hope to see.
See if there's any more questions.
Are there any other?
One quick question. My name's Andrew McFarland. I'm with Mobile Pulse. Are you also considering the use of Wi-Fi on those mobile devices? Wi-Fi offload, whether it's switched off from a carrier or whether someone's on a Wi-Fi network themselves?
Yeah, not at the moment. We're focused on the mobile broadband networks, not Wi-Fi networks, but the networks provided by the wireless providers.
And one of the problems, just to illustrate that, again, based on the landline experience, wireline experience, is that while we are considering how to better take into account impairments that are induced by the home infrastructure, many of the Wi-Fi offload would be for users at home. And we know already that there's any number of issues that we have no knowledge or insight into that could even further complicate all the issues that were already mentioned in the questions. And again, we see that as an evolving program. We tend to err on the side of doing something simple that is useful initially and then learn, as opposed to trying to do everything at once and never get done. So the goal is start small, start not as ambitious as one might like, and then learn collaboratively and make each report better than the last one.
Let me add a more nuanced answer to that. There are passive performance metrics that are available that on the phones that discuss network type, transport. So we're at least open for discussion on the subject of what information we should be getting. So I don't want to foreclose opportunities, especially at this early point.
Good morning. Jack Michalski from Qualcomm. Walt, you mentioned that the previous effort, there was a meeting about once a month of the stakeholders, and I'm just wondering...
Roughly every 3 weeks, actually.
Oh, every 3 weeks. Okay. What the logistics would be for this one, sort of...
We're starting out in fact, we're piggybacking, just for convenience sake. October 10th, I announced as the proposed meeting date for what we're calling the small M collaborative. And that happens to be the date of one of our regular wireline meetings. What we've done and how we've operated those meetings logistically is first of all, people who are interested contact us in various forms. Sometimes it's a trade group, and we'll have a trade group representative, which to the extent that it organizes or self-organizes an interest group, helps us enormously. You can contact, and our contact here, by the way, will be James Miller. So what I'm going to say at the end, if I forget, is send all requests to James Miller, james.miller@fcc.gov. But we'll create a mailing list that will discuss the scheduled meetings, and also is the list that we send out all documents. So we have these regular meetings. We document what occurs at these meetings. We also have some exchanges associated with these meetings through the mailing list. The meetings themselves we hold not in the commission meeting room, which isn't practical for us. Wish we had a dozen of these rooms throughout the building. Well, we hold them typically in our largest informal conference room. For those of you, who have come to the FCC, those are the South Conference rooms. They hold about 40 people comfortably. We also we use WebEx now to extend the reach of those meetings. And actually, we have a higher percentage now of WebEx attendees than in-house attendees. It probably runs anywhere from a little over 1-to-1 to sometimes 3-to-1, and it depends upon the complexity. What happens typically is that when discussing complex issues, there's large numbers of people involved from various stakeholder groups, and the attendance goes up, and most of that attendance is remote. When we're discussing more mundane issues, scheduling issues, operational issues, attendance goes way down because it's just a normal meeting agenda. So we expect to run those probably synchronized with the wireless meetings, with the wireline meetings rather. They typically take 2 to 3 hours to run. So these are long meetings. They're project scheduling meetings. And it's been very successful and interesting getting different stakeholders involved. And it's a complex process, but it works. We've got 2 years of experience on that, and it's been a wealth of information for us. We wouldn't have had the program we had if it wasn't for the contributions of both academia and industry in terms of helping to normalize our program.
Okay, great, thanks.
Any other questions, or we'll call the meeting to an end?
Thanks, everybody, for coming. And again, contact James Miller if you're interested in participating moving forward. And we welcome all questions, comments, and input.